When I was a child, my mother used to say, "Some truths are better left in silence." I never understood what she meant until the day I opened that old wooden drawer in our living room. It was an ordinary afternoon in our small town, sunlight spilling through lace curtains, the faint hum of cicadas outside. I wasn't looking for secrets. I was just cleaning the house my parents left behind. But fate doesn't knock before it changes everything. When I pulled that drawer open, a thin layer of dust floated in the air. Inside were the usual things: old bills, postcards, a dried-up pen, and then a folded yellow envelope tucked underneath a stack of photographs. My name wasn't on it, but I knew my father's handwriting. It felt like the air in the room had shifted. I remember whispering to myself, "Dad, what were you hiding?" I sat on the floor, heart pounding. The letter was sealed but brittle at the edges, like time itself had tried to protect it. I hesitated, my fingers trembling as I slid it open. The paper inside was thin, written in blue ink, every line slightly faded. The first words made my throat tighten. "If you ever read this, it means the truth has finally found its way to you." In that moment, I felt the house grow heavier, as if every wall around me was listening. And before I even finished reading, I knew my life would never feel the same again. It had been almost 6 years since I last stepped inside that house. After my father's passing, I couldn't bring myself to visit. But now, standing in the doorway again, it felt like time had folded in on itself. The house smelled of old books and cedar wood. Every photo frame on the wall seemed frozen in happier times. I grew up here, in this small American town where everyone knows your name, and secrets travel faster than the wind. Mom passed away first, when I was 20. Dad followed 4 years later. Since then, I'd been living in Chicago, far from the memories I wasn't ready to face. Coming back now felt like reopening a wound that never healed. My father wasn't a man of many words. He worked long hours at the local repair shop, came home tired, but never forgot to sit with me at dinner. He used to fix radios, watches, anything that ticked or hummed. I used to sit beside him, pretending to help, though I mostly just watched. He'd smile and say, "Everything can be fixed if you're patient enough." I didn't know then that some things, like trust, break too quietly to ever notice. He never talked much about his childhood, or about Mom's side of the family. Whenever I asked, he'd say, "Some stories don't belong in daylight." I always thought it was just his poetic way of avoiding questions. But after finding that letter, those words haunted me differently. I decided to stay for a few days, clean the place, maybe sell it later. The town looked exactly the same. The diner still had the same blue booths and the same waitress who called everyone sweetheart. The streets were lined with maple trees turning gold for the fall. It should have felt comforting, but it didn't. It felt stuck, like a photograph that refused to fade. Everyone who saw me smiled kindly. But behind their smiles, I sensed something else. Whispers, pity, maybe curiosity. Small towns have a way of remembering what you'd rather forget. On the third day, I started cleaning the attic. Old boxes, broken lamps, stacks of letters. It was like stepping into a time capsule. That's when I found my father's old notebook, the one he used to keep near his workbench. The pages were filled with dates and small notes. Town hall visit, talk to Ellen, call from M. None of it made sense, until I noticed something scribbled on the last page. "The drawer will tell her when the time is right." My hands froze. The same drawer. The same day. It was as if he had left breadcrumbs waiting for me to follow. That night, I couldn't sleep. The letter sat on my bedside table, folded neatly. I hadn't finished reading it yet, afraid that once I did, I wouldn't be able to go back to before. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint creak of the house, and wondered what kind of truth could make a father hide his words for years. I thought about how he used to sit by that same window, watching the rain, his face calm but distant. Now I understood that calm wasn't peace. It was guilt wearing silence as a mask. When I was 16, I overheard my parents arguing in the kitchen. It was rare. They almost never fought. Mom's voice trembled. "You promised me she'd never find out." Dad said something I couldn't hear, and then silence. When I entered the room, they both smiled too quickly, pretending everything was fine. At the time, I convinced myself it was about money. But now, sitting here years later, I realized it was about me. The next morning, I made coffee, opened the curtains, and sat down with the letter again. My hands didn't tremble this time. Whatever was inside, I needed to know. I unfolded it slowly, the paper whispering like an old friend with a secret. As I began to read, I realized my father had written this not for forgiveness, but for confession. The letter began gently, almost lovingly. My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you the truth 100 times, but every time I looked at you, I couldn't bear to see the pain it might cause. I stopped reading for a moment, staring at his handwriting. The ink was uneven, like he'd written through tears. He called me Emily, that was my mother's name. He'd never called me that before. Was it a mistake? Or was he writing to someone else? My pulse quickened. I turned the letter over. There was only one sheet. It had my father's name at the end, but everything in between felt foreign. He wrote about a decision that destroyed 2 lives, about a daughter who never should have carried someone else's blood. I froze. The words didn't make sense at first. Then, like a photograph developing in water, the truth started to take shape. Was he saying I wasn't his daughter? I stood up, pacing the room. No, that can't be true, I whispered. My voice sounded small, almost childlike. I wanted to tear the letter apart, to undo the words before they settled in my heart. But another voice inside me said, "You've always known something wasn't right." I thought about the arguments, the secrets, the nights I'd catch Mom crying alone on the porch. My father's kindness suddenly felt like guilt disguised as love. I went back to the attic, grabbed his old notebook again, and flipped through every page. There it was, the initials MJ written beside the word hospital. And another note, visit, September 1995. That was the year I was born. I felt my stomach twist. I pulled out my birth certificate from a box of old papers. Something caught my eye. The hospital name was different from what I'd been told all my life. I whispered, "Who am I really?" As I dug through more boxes, a photograph slipped out from between 2 books. It showed my mother, younger, smiling beside a man I didn't recognize. They stood in front of a white fence, his arm around her shoulder. On the back, written in my mother's handwriting, "For the days we thought love could last." I sat still for a long time. The man looked nothing like my father. His eyes, they were my eyes. My mind went back to the last conversation I had with Dad before he passed. He'd been lying in his hospital bed, weak but alert. He grabbed my hand and said, "There are things you don't need to carry." I thought he meant regrets. Now I realized he meant truths. If only I had asked him then. If only he had told me. But if only comes too late, doesn't it? There was only one person who might know more. My mother's sister, Aunt Clara. She lived 15 minutes out of town in a little blue house by the river. When I arrived, she looked surprised, maybe even scared. I told her I'd found a letter from Dad. Her hands shook as she set down her tea. "Did he tell you everything?" she asked quietly. That's when I knew. She already knew. Aunt Clara took a long breath. "Your mother made a mistake, honey. A big one? But your father loved you more than his own pride." My voice cracked. "So, he wasn't my real father?" Tears welled in her eyes. "He was your father in every way that mattered. But biologically," she hesitated, then whispered, "your real father was a man named Michael. He left before you were born. The world seemed to blur." I felt both angry and hollow, like someone had stolen my reflection. It started raining outside, the sound heavy against the roof. Aunt Clara tried to comfort me, but her words felt distant. I left before she could say more. Driving home through the storm, I kept hearing Dad's voice in my head. "Everything can be fixed if you're patient enough." But how do you fix something you never knew was broken? Back home, I read the letter one more time. At the end, Dad wrote, "I wanted you to grow up without shame. I wanted you to believe love could heal what lies destroy. If you hate me, I'll understand." I didn't hate him, but I hated the silence. The years we spent pretending, smiling at family dinners while a truth sat between us like an invisible wall. That night, I cried for both of them, the man who lied and the man who loved me enough to lie. I walked to the mirror and stared at myself. For the first time, I didn't know whose face I was looking at. Was I my father's daughter? Or just a reminder of someone else's sin? I pressed my palm to the glass and whispered, "I wish you'd just told me." But the reflection didn't answer. It only stared back, quiet and sad, like it had been waiting for this moment all along. The morning after the rain, everything felt still. The streets outside were wet, leaves scattered across the driveway. I made coffee, but it tasted like water. Sleep hadn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the letter, my father's handwriting, the truth inked between the lines. How could love and betrayal exist in the same sentence? For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure who I was mourning, my father or the story I thought was real. Later that day, I went to the garage to clear out more of Dad's things. There was a wooden box tucked behind a shelf sealed with tape. It was labeled in his handwriting, for her. My heart pounded. Was it for Mom? For me? I tore the tape gently and opened it. Inside were two things, an old Polaroid camera and another envelope. This one said, "To my daughter when she's ready." I sat down on the floor right there and began to read. "You were never my mistake. You were my second chance. When your mother told me the truth, I broke, but I also saw you, tiny and crying, and I knew. I couldn't walk away from you. You saved me more times than you'll ever know." My eyes blurred with tears. He wasn't my blood, but he was my father in every way that mattered. And still, he'd carried this pain alone to protect me. As I read, my mind painted the scene he described. He'd found out about Mom's affair just weeks before I was born. He left the house, drove to the river, sat there till sunrise, trying to decide whether to stay or go. But when the nurse handed him the newborn baby, me, he said the world stopped. I looked into your eyes and saw the only thing worth forgiving. I could almost see him there, young, hurt but holding on anyway. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried until I couldn't anymore. He hadn't betrayed me. He had protected me from a truth too heavy for a child to carry. And yet I still wished he'd told me before he left. Because now all I had were letters and ghosts. I whispered to the empty room, "I forgive you, Dad." And for a second it felt like he was there, standing by the door, smiling like he used to. But the story didn't end there. The letter mentioned one last thing, a name and an address written in faint pencil at the bottom. Michael Johnson, Cedarwood Care Home. My biological father. For days I debated whether to go. I didn't owe him anything, but a part of me needed to look him in the eyes, to see if I could find myself there. The drive took 2 hours. The road wound through open fields, the radio playing quietly. I kept imagining what I'd say. Would I call him Dad? Or just Michael? The sky was clear, but inside it felt like a storm still lingered. When I pulled into the parking lot, my hands were cold on the steering wheel. For a moment, I almost turned back. The nurse led me into a small garden behind the care home. An old man sat on a bench feeding birds. He looked up when he saw me, and his eyes, those same eyes I'd seen in the photograph, widened. He didn't ask who I was. He just said, "You look like your mother." My voice trembled. "I'm your daughter." The words felt strange on my tongue. He nodded slowly, tears filling his eyes. I was afraid I'd never hear that. We sat together for a while. He told me about how he met my mother, how they were young, reckless, and thought love could survive anything. When she found out she was pregnant, he panicked. He left thinking he was doing the right thing. By the time he came back, she'd already chosen another man to be my father. He looked at me, voice cracking. I thought I'd lost my chance forever. "But your father, he was a better man than I ever was." I couldn't speak. The man I'd come to blame and the one who left, both had been broken by the same love. Michael reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. "I kept this all these years," he said. Inside was a baby photo, me wrapped in a pink blanket. He'd written on the back, "Emily's light." I closed my eyes. My mother had called me that too. We didn't need to say much after that. Sometimes silence carries more truth than words. When I left the care home, the sun was setting. The sky burned orange and pink, like it was trying to tell me that endings could still be beautiful. I drove home with the window down, the wind cool against my face. For the first time, I didn't feel lost. I felt like I belonged to two men who both loved me in their own imperfect ways. When I got back home, everything looked the same. The porch light flickering, the wind chimes swaying softly in the night air. But something in me had changed. For weeks, I'd been searching for answers. Now, I realized what I'd been looking for wasn't truth. It was peace. I stood in front of the house and whispered, "I'm home, Dad." And the wind carried the words away like a quiet promise. Inside, the house was silent except for the clock ticking. His old chair sat by the window just as he left it, a blanket folded neatly across the armrest. I sat down, feeling the indent where he used to rest his hand. For a long time, I said nothing, then I smiled. You did your best. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. It was understanding. That night, I wrote a letter to Mom. I told her I knew everything. I didn't ask why. Instead, I wrote, "You both made choices that hurt, but those choices gave me two fathers who loved me in their own broken ways." I sealed the envelope and placed it on the kitchen counter. I didn't know if I'd ever send it, but writing it was enough. A few days later, I drove to the cemetery. The grass was green, the air cool and quiet. I placed the letter and a small Polaroid photo, the one from his box, beside his gravestone. "I found him," I said softly. "And I finally understand what you were trying to protect me from." A single tear rolled down, but it didn't hurt this time. It felt like letting go. As I stood there, a memory came back. Me as a child, sitting on his shoulders during a 4th of July parade. He had laughed so freely that day. Back then, I didn't know how much pain he was hiding behind that smile. Now I did, and it made me love him even more. Weeks passed, and life slowly found its rhythm again. I started painting, something I hadn't done since college. Each color I mixed felt like part of a story being healed. Blues for pain, reds for truth, gold for forgiveness. One morning, I looked at the canvas and realized it was a portrait of both my fathers, standing on opposite sides of me, faces blurred, but hearts bright. One afternoon, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, a nurse stood there holding a small package. "Mr. Johnson asked me to bring this to you," she said. Inside the box was an old key and a note. "Your father kept this safe for years. He said it was for when you were ready to open your heart again." The key was labeled, "Cabin, Lakewood." A week later, I drove to Lakewood. The cabin was small, hidden between tall pines overlooking the quiet water. Inside, everything was untouched. His fishing hat, the old coffee mug, and a framed photo of me as a little girl. On the table was a note written years ago. "If you ever come here, it means you're ready to start again. Remember, family isn't built by blood. It's built by love." I sat down and watched the lake shimmer in the sunlight. It felt like he was still there, sitting beside me. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of betrayal or questions. I felt gratitude for the truth, for the pain, for the love that had survived everything. I picked up my phone and called the care home. When Michael answered, I said, "I think he'd want you to come see this place." He laughed softly. "I'd like that." Months later, I stood by the lake again. 2 chairs this time, one for me, one for him. We didn't talk much. We just watched the sunset paint the water gold. I realized something that day. Sometimes the people who break us are the same ones who teach us how to love deeply. And forgiveness doesn't erase the pain. It turns it into something beautiful. A few weeks later, I returned to the lake one last time. The air was cool and smelled of pine. Autumn leaves drifted across the water like slow-moving memories. I sat on the same wooden chair my father used to use, holding the letter that changed everything. It had worn edges now, folded too many times. But every word still felt alive. I whispered, "I forgive you, Dad." And for the first time, I truly meant it. Life is strange. We spend so much time trying to protect the people we love that we sometimes end up hurting them the most. My father wasn't a perfect man, but maybe love doesn't need perfection. Maybe it only needs courage. I used to think his silence was weakness. Now I know it was sacrifice. The letter didn't just reveal a secret. It revealed the kind of love that hides in the quiet corners of life, the kind that endures even when the truth doesn't. Before I left, I took out my sketchbook and began to draw the cabin, the lake, and 2 figures standing side by side. It was my way of keeping them both alive. The man who raised me and the one who gave me life. Different stories, same love. I closed the sketchbook, placed the letter inside, and left it on the table. Maybe one day someone else will find it and learn that love, no matter how painful, is still worth keeping. As I walked back toward the car, I turned one last time to look at the cabin. The wind rustled through the trees like a whisper, almost like his voice. "Be happy, sweetheart," I smiled, tears filling my eyes, and said, "I will." The road home felt lighter that day. Because sometimes closure doesn't come from answers. It comes from the courage to let go. He kept his secret to protect me. But in the end, that secret taught me what love really means.